All right, so I am doing our first actual episode, and after a lot of the experiences lately with life and relationships, and just in general, I wanted to talk more about men's rights. And it's an issue that I've had with an atheist fella named AronRa and a few of his cohorts on YouTube. He's a feminist, and he says that anybody who isn't a feminist is against women, basically. This is, paraphrased from a lot of his videos and a lot of his interviews about this, and he's probably made, at least 20 videos regarding the subject, or at least he's had 20 public conversations about this.
And pulled up a half a dozen different dictionaries, all of which gave the exact same one and only definition that I use. A feminist is one who advocates equal rights and treatment for women. That's it. That's the only definition there is or ever was.
And we got into it because of definitions and him playing, on these definitions and using this appeal to authority for things like that in our topics on atheism and creationism. And so when I was looking at his words to me, it looked as if though he was arguing with somebody that wasn't me. And I wanted to get a little bit more information, and so I looked him up, and we got into these conversations about definitions and about meanings of words and history of language, and I was like, well, that's awfully strange, because these are words we haven't even brought into the conversation. These are words that, are random and out of place. And I looked him up, and I looked into his other arguments, on other subjects, and one of them was feminism. It's a big thing for him. And this is the same kind of thing, this word salad that often gets played by him, this this meaning means this, and there's no other meaning, and that's how you've got to define it, and the authority is the dictionary. And so then we brought up the term religion, which the Oxford Advanced Learner Dictionary says atheism and agnosticism is religion. And he says, no, it can't be, because this is what atheism is, and then he uses a definition for atheism. But the dictionary, his authority that he appeals to, says differently. Says that atheism, agnosticism, Buddhism, Christianity, Islam are all forms of religion. Well, that's not appropriate for him. So anyway, this has brought up more things regarding feminism and men's rights and the way society works today regarding these things, and and how men are treated in society in this new era. So that's what we're going to talk about. So like I said, this is my first video here, or my first broadcast on Anchor. And Anchor is a great platform. I like their mixing that you can do at the end. You can put in background music. You can, make a lot of edits and make professional media, really professional radio broadcast or podcast. And I'm really into it. So we're going to see how it works out. I'm going to start posting these at disruptarian.com. So if you're interested, take a peek at us at disruptarian.com. And I'm also doing Steemit. Steemit is a great platform for video blogging for me, and for text blogging as well, for writing articles. So I've got a couple of different accounts on Steemit, and you can find information for that at veracitylife.com. Look up the meaning of veracity if you're not aware of it. It basically means truth or transparency, and I like to get to the bottom of all of that. So as a person who is a theist, I don't know that I would consider myself a Christian, because I don't think most of Christendom would consider me as a Christian. And I know that if I was in the 4th or 5th or 6th century AD, I would be probably burned at the stake for heresy for my beliefs. And long before I even got acquainted with the Gnostics and Gnosis, these ancient terms for gaining knowledge or seeking knowledge, and these Christian sects, which the Catholic Church would call heretics, you know, I felt very similar to what they believe and did not feel like I belonged in any Christian religion. So I never joined another church after I left what I was raised with, which was Mormonism. I left that as a teenager, officially got my name removed from the Mormon records when I was 19, and never really had a calling. I didn't do my priesthood things. I never really bought into it at all in any point of my life. My brother got his priesthood. I think he was in the Aaronic priesthood, despite not being a proper Mormon, you know, with all of the requirements met. But, you know, he bought into it and, you know, really got acquainted with the Mormon church. And my father and mother were baptized and then married in the Mormon temple. So, you know, that was later in life. That was in my dad's late 50s, right before he died, that he got married to my mother in the temple. So that was the religion I was raised in. After I left that, I was baptized in the river, up in the Provo River, in Provo Canyon. So it was kind of an outdoorsy thing by a Pentecostal minister named Gene Short, whose church I was not a member either, but I, you know, had an acquaintance with him and wanted to do my duty to be baptized and show my loyalty to the faith that I had in Christ, and just to make that provisional effort, you know, and to announce as, you know, a person that wanted to be accountable that I was a Christian and that I felt this was a necessary step in my faith. But I never joined his church. Later, I would get married to my wife. She was Wiccan at the time, something I had also dabbled in. And then she got baptized in the Pikes Peak Park Baptist Church while we were married, about 2 years into our marriage. And it wasn't a church that we were members of there either, but it was a place that was closest to our house, and we went to listen to doctrine and, you know, encouragement and have some fellowship, which I think is important. I do think fellowship is an extremely important thing. And even though I can be in fellowship, whether it's on top of a mountain or whether it's at a Rastafari circle smoking ganja, or whether it's at a Baptist church, I mean, I find fellowship wherever it's presented. So, as I said, you know, being a nonconformist, at least in some aspects of my walk with faith and beliefs in, you know, theism and deities, I have been open and able to explore without a lot of consequence from my fellowship. Because I'm very open and honest about the fact that I don't subscribe. I don't subscribe to your church. I don't subscribe to their church. I don't subscribe to whatever the world presents, but I do find that seeking knowledge is my path. And this is the path of the Gnostics. And that's something that the Catholic Church was not willing to accept, and that's why they considered these people heretics, and many of them were killed. And they continued to rise all throughout history, all the way up to the Knights Templar, the Cathars, you know, all of these in France and in Israel, and a lot of the Inquisitions had to do with these heretical groups like the Gnostics, where the Catholics would just try to wipe them out. And one great thing that happened with them is that they knew of their persecution and that their fate was dismal, and they buried their texts from the 1st and 2nd century. So we have a gospel and a collection of texts from that era and from those followers of Christ that predate the manuscripts that were included in the Catholic Bible, in the you know, the Nicene Creed and other creeds to follow in the King James. You know, these things that are compiled are manipulated, are incorrect and changed and altered and falsified, and edited, where you don't have a lot of the same books that you would, find in these collections that predate the manuscripts that are included in our common Bible, and what we would probably link back to the King James compilation, and prior to that, the Nicene Creed from the 4th century. And so, these collections, these Gnostic collections that were found in Egypt and near a town called Nag Hammadi, in a little cave that two brothers had found in like the early 40s. These, came about and were released, and I guess they're in the museum in Cairo right now. But in like 1946, they started being examined when these two brothers finally sold them off to an antiquities dealer. And so after that, they made it to their rightful place now in the museum, and they can be researched or examined by others now. So point of that is, and how this relates back to men's rights and feminism and these topics that are on my mind, is you see a lot of history that was erased by the Catholics and by Rome. And when I talk about Catholics, I'm not talking about the Universal Church of Christ. I'm talking about the government of Rome. And, that's what the Catholic Church is. When the Bible refers to the Catholic Church and Jesus refers to the Catholic Church, or at least Paul does, in reference to Jesus's church, it's the universal church of God, not a foundation of politics and wealth, but of a fellowship, of a common fellowship, which is kind of how the Gnostics rolled. They gathered together, they had fellowship, but, they weren't restricted by texts and traditions. They followed the path of knowledge, which is what their sect or, belief system was named after, Gnosis. And so what came out of those books, out of that collection of the Nag Hammadi cave, was the Gospel of Mary and the Gospel of Thomas. Now, the Gospel of Mary and some of the other texts seem to indicate that Mary, possibly Mary Magdalene, was Jesus's wife, but most certainly one of the more revered apostles, where he revealed things to her that he didn't reveal to his other apostles, and then she would deliver these things to them while he was still alive, would, take his words and deliver them. And instead of it being Peter or, one of the others, Peter really probably thought he was the one that should be delivering it, and others, were probably a little upset to be appointed in such a place, a rightful place of being next to Jesus or being by his side or being one of his chosen. And so in the Gospel of Thomas, and I'd have to point it out, and I'll probably write an article about this and post it on Steemit. But, in the Gospel of Thomas, it looks like what was in there was not what shows up now. It looks like it was edited, and, it looks like something was scratched out and replaced. And it looks like what I think it's Peter is saying, and according to these, in this Gospel of Thomas, is that why would Mary be in such a position? She does not deserve life, in some sort of a context, and I'm paraphrasing that. But that's the cultural, things that upset the Catholics and others about the Gnostic Church, is that they would reveal these things and that they would preserve these teachings and that they would present these teachings. And that's why a lot of them were killed off, at least in the 4th, 5th, and 6th century. But then also later on too, probably in relation to that, but also that the Gnostics broke tradition and also revealed knowledge that the Catholic Church tried to lock away and hide. So the Gnostics are a very fascinating thing. So for me, and I just want to make it clear that I really take to that, and it makes sense to me that Mary would be chosen by Jesus. The context that we can see, that, you have to read between the lines, looks as if though she's very close to Jesus, anointing him with the very expensive oil and just, waiting by his tomb and just being very attentive to him and him responding favorably. Now, there's a lot of context missing if we combine the Catholic text with the Gnostic text, we see that. But, I do have a reverence for this Gnostic teaching of a, multi-dimensional God with both feminine and male qualities. And, in Catholic teachings and Islamic teachings and other teachings, that doesn't seem to present itself very well, that God has a both male and female aspect. But he does, in my opinion, that makes a lot of sense, how not only was man made in God's image, but also woman was too. And I believe God probably, at least whatever creator it is that we are referring to, and there's a lot of debate about that, even in Gnosticism, that creator had both aspects, and that's why we were created in his image. And that's why, in the Bible, it talks about man will leave his mother and father, and woman will leave her mother and father, and the two will become twain. They'll become one. And, it's that yin and yang theory that men and women depend on each other to become one. And without the other, we're only half. And so, I think that unity really completes the circle. And so I revere in, recent political and in recent social history with like women's suffrage and the whole women's movement and first wave feminism. I adore it. I think it's amazing that, these people stood up and fought hard and won their rights to vote, to work, to whatever, to wear pants, for crying out loud, whatever. I think that's wonderful. And I fully support it. But the new ideas of feminism and what they call second or third wave feminism, I would call it third wave. I think there's been, really three waves of feminism. Certainly in American history, we had women's suffrage. Then we had a 1950s type of feminism, what's her name? Molly the Riveter, or whatever her name is. Now I can't remember her name, but the poster for World War II of the woman at the airplane manufacturing plant for the war, and why can't I remember her name now? Escapes me. But there was that feminism. So you had the women's right to vote, then you had the women's right to work. But now with third wave feminism, what you've got is man-shaming and segregation, and women, really trying to put men in their place. And I saw something in regards to AronRa, and so I'm glad he opened this door. He came to my channel on YouTube, he opened this door about evolution, but it led into many other things, and I looked him up through this topic of feminism just to see why he was playing these weird word games with me, which, it panned out to be, that's not just me he plays these word games with, and it's not just with.
And pulled up a half a dozen different dictionaries, all of which gave the exact same one and only definition that I use. A feminist is one who advocates equal rights and treatment for women. That's it. That's the only definition there is or ever was.
With logic and critical thinking, made some extraordinary statements about feminism. Now, the reason those statements are so extraordinary is not because he stated things never stated before. It's because he himself stated them. In a string of assertions AronRa made, he managed to commit one or more fallacies one after another. Now, Thunderf00t made a very good video where he juxtaposed AronRa's fallacious arguments with contradicting data, and although it was quite interesting and amusing to watch, I still feel like these fallacies should have been pointed out, simply because the person who made them is known to point out the very same fallacies himself all the time when he debates religious people. So it boggles the mind that he of all people would fail in the same manner the likes of Ken Ham and Ray Comfort are well known for. However, I may be able to explain why this happens, and I'll explain after reviewing AronRa's statements. Now I feel I should stress that pointing out logical fallacies are not counter-arguments at all. But the main point of this video is not to counter-argue, not as much, just to highlight how even the people who are very rational and logical can also be completely blind to logic when their own personal emotional issues kick in. So this is why I'm going to do something I usually don't do and highlight the many fallacies he committed and later explain why I think it happens. So AronRa, you call yourself a skeptic and a critical thinker. And indeed, when it comes to debating religious nonsense, you manage to point out the bullshit and the logical inconsistencies of fallacious arguments. Please note that in your following statements about feminism, you committed the following fallacies.
And pulled up a half a dozen different dictionaries, all of which gave the exact same one and only definition that I use. A feminist is one who advocates equal rights and treatment for women. That's it. That's the only definition there is or ever was.
Fallacious persuasive definition and also appealed to dictionary. While the latter is more well known and as described in the website logically fallacious, using a dictionary's limited definition of a term as evidence that term cannot have another meaning, expanded meaning, or even a conflicting meaning. This is a fallacy because dictionaries don't reason. They simply are a reflection of an abbreviated version of the current accepted usage of a term, as determined through argumentation and eventual acceptance. In short, dictionaries tell you what a word means according to the authors at the time it was written, not what it meant before that time, after, or what it should mean, which I think is the main point here. Dictionary meanings are usually concise and lack the depth found in an encyclopedia. Therefore, terms found in dictionaries are often incomplete when it comes to helping people to gain full understanding of a term. Which brings us to why there is a fallacy called a persuasive definition fallacy. Meaning it's not an academic or an accurate one, but trying to persuade you to think something is as it is defined. For example, if we define Coca-Cola to be the best cola drink, or Islam to be the religion of peace, it would not be accurate or correct. So here's a small glimpse into more academic descriptions of feminism. The term feminism has many different uses, and its meanings are often contested. Feminism comprises a number of social, cultural, and political movements, theories, and moral philosophies concerned with gender inequalities and equal rights for women. Finally, here's the Wikipedia definition, which was even used by a well-known feminist academic in a formal debate, and it goes like this. Feminism is a range of political movements, ideologies, and social movements that share a common goal to define, establish, and achieve equal political, economical, personal, and social rights for women. Now, even though this is a very accurate description, it still fails in one very important aspect. There's a major difference between what is stated by feminists and feminist movements and what they actually do in real life, and you can say that about any politician, political party, or government as well. Therefore, to assert that their actions and goals are to bring equality is incorrect, when there are so many cases where they actually take actions and bring policies which reduce equality, sometimes even openly stating they hold a diametrically opposing position to gender equality, a second wave feminists are well known for.
When we stepped up to the microphone and said men are the enemy.
In 1979, revolutionary feminists in Leeds wrote a manifesto, arguing that women would only be free if they stopped having sex with men.
Were heterosexual women who were on our side. But what I could never understand, and I did resent, was them going home to men at night. It just seemed such a contradiction. And often I would get very angry when I would challenge them about this, and they would say, well, that's just the way I am, I just don't fancy women. Having no understanding at all of the fact that sexuality is a social construct, and that we all make choices depending on the way that we want to live in the world we want to see.
Were you separatist?
Oh yes, we were separatist.
As far as I was concerned, it seemed impossible to find out who we really were as women while men's thoughts were still around, and what could we really be, and who could we really become, and what would a woman's culture look like, and what would a woman's world look like? How could it work, and how could it be organised?
time I'm telling the truth. I'm sick and tired of lying and concealing the reality. I'm young since I was 16, maybe all of my life. I'm a die, I'm a die, I'm a die.
Everything at that time would have been women only.
Some women felt they didn't want to have kids if those kids were going to be boy kids.
Maybe early 80s, where women who had sons weren't allowed to leave their sons in the creche. You could only leave your daughters in the creche.
A lot of radical feminists felt that you should give them up. There were actually women who were saying you should give up boy children.
The reason I left, and left both my children, was that boys weren't allowed.
And he's religious about feminism, and he's dogmatic.
Feminism is my religion. I wouldn't know how to think without it.
And he has a lot of cognitive dissonance that he won't change his mind on these topics, and he gets mad. He gets downright mad and starts shouting down other atheist colleagues of his when they question him on feminism. But SkepTorr in that video about AronRa being the religious atheist shows a video from the 1970s from the UK. And this video shows these third-wave feminists, and they had a huge movement. You know, hundreds of people would show up at their music events, and they would have these little, what they call a creche, more of a commune, where women would gather in these communes to separate themselves from men, and thousands would go, and be a part of these communes, and they had rules. They were, kind of doing these ad hoc rules on the fly, but one of them was that if a woman had a male son, that the male son was not allowed to be in the so-called creche, that they were encouraged to give their sons away. And I don't know about the abortion topic, that didn't come up in the video, but they certainly didn't want men or male children in these communes. And, their reasoning was that these were, future men and so-called future oppressors, and that they had no place in these communities. And then, you'd get up and, they'd have their, I don't know what we would call in Mormonism, like a testimony, and they would get up and they would, preach, basically, and give their testimonies about feminism. And they would get up, basically, and with their books, they would hand out flyers with these same notions, and that men were the enemy. And they would resent women who would, be a part of these feminist movements, but then at night go home to men. And, it was a very, it's still like that. I mean, you look at these LGBT communities, and the only men that they accept are feminized men and homosexual men. And if they're in any way conservative or patriarchal, excuse my speech, can't pronounce things tonight, patriarchal, like Milo Yiannopoulos, they shun that as well. No masculinity. So they accept a few males, but for the most part, it's a female-only type of movement. And, you look at this in a lot of different liberal or progressive movements, and especially in the cannabis movement, and you don't see a lot of masculinity there. You see a lot of femininity and a lot of segregation. And so even with the men that are in these movements, you see that they're effeminate and betas, and very few alphas are in that movement, and certainly very few conservatives as well. But that's bled in from this third wave feminism that really started in the late 60s and early 70s. And if I could, I think I can find that documentary, the full documentary. But if not, I'll post a link to SkepTorr's video. And then I'll show a lot of these pamphlets and a lot of these documents and flyers, as well as videos of these movements from feminism in the 70s, where they shamed men and they preached segregation of the two sexes, the two genders. And that's bled into today. And so even in subtle ways, even, me and my wife or me and my mother, I see that with females in my life. Now, not all of them, but it comes up in weird ways in many different situations where, if you show too much alpha, too much masculinity, it's like offensive, or, it's like oppressive. And could be little things like finances. It could be little things like, working, holding a job while the, wife or the other spouse stays at home with the children and does housework. Things like that, the way that men and women were built from day one, men are stronger, men are, they persevere in work, they work longer hours, even in today's society, they work much longer hours, they work much more dangerous jobs, and they, are the ones that die. Like 80% of work-related injuries and death comes from the male population. Only 20% comes from the female population, because men work dangerous jobs and females typically don't. So that's how men were built, and women were built to bear children and to be domestic managers. I'm not going to call it a housewife because that would be offensive, but domestic managers, managing the house. But that's sexist now. And, playing gender roles is sexist. And now they're coming up, these liberals and these third-wave feminists are coming up with this idea that gender is a social construct, that XY and XX chromosomes mean nothing, that gender is now a social construct. So it's just bizarre the way that the world is working, and the Western world especially. Like, you see the decline in births now. Very few people are wanting to have children. Very few people are, engaging in marriage. And when they do, there's a huge divorce rate now. Back in the 50s, the divorce rate was less than half of what it is now. And divorces are on the rise. Births are on decline. And you see populations, getting older, and very few youth are entering the workforce. So now they're bringing in Muslim immigrants to all these countries that are declining in population. They say like a 1.13 birth rate is irreversible, because for every 2 adults, having only 1 child means that the next generation is going to have half as many people in the workforce to take care of this aging population. And that means that the population will start to decline rather than grow as well. So in order to maintain a stable population, a lot of these refugees are being welcomed, and immigrants are being welcomed. And I think that it's, beyond just reasons of displacement and war. I think, there's a bigger agenda here. And, Western culture has become so feminized, and marriage has become so hated, and traditional values have become so despised that our population is shrinking. And, the marriage situation is becoming less desirable. And so now, with populations declining and a disparity in the young and the old population, they're bringing in Muslims and other immigrants, but mostly Muslim immigrants and refugees. So, there's a lot of negative aspects of this. The contention and division and segregation is one aspect of it. When we're constantly divided, when we're constantly bickering at each other, they do this with race as well, where, the blacks hate the whites, the white hates the blacks. George Soros has, for over 40 years, said that he wants to destroy American culture. This is a quote he gave, I think it was in Newsweek about 30 years ago, saying that he hates the American culture and he wishes to destroy it. Paraphrase. And I'll also put that in my article at Veracity Life. So, you know, he has done this in other cultures. Like, he'll fund neo-Nazis in the Ukraine, but he'll fund Black Lives Matter in the United States. And what he's doing is reducing the strength of the culture and weakening people so they're fighting with each other. And when the culture declines, the currency declines in value. And then when the currency declines, he buys up the currency at a discounted rate and he sells it at a profit. So that to me says that, you know, this is artificial. This isn't natural. He's manipulating society. You'll see these Antifa people that are getting paid by him. And, you know, he has this open society movement, and he just gave $15 billion of his like $18 billion in wealth that he has. He gave like over 90% of his wealth to this open societies thing, and it's a umbrella group that funds Black Lives Matter, Antifa, Media Matters, and a bunch of other groups underneath. I think there's 116 total groups, and you know they're using media, they're using communication and propaganda to disrupt society, and he does this.
You're a Hungarian Jew who escaped the Holocaust by posing as a Christian.
Right.
And you watched lots of people get shipped off to the death camps.
Right. I was 14 years old. And I would say that that's when my character was made.
In what way?
That one should think ahead, one should understand and anticipate events, and one is threatened. It was a tremendous threat of evil. I mean, it was a very personal experience of evil.
My understanding is that you went out with this protector of yours who swore that you were his adopted godson.
Yes, yes.
Went out, in fact, and helped in the confiscation of property from the Jews.
That's right. Yes.
I mean, that sounds like an experience that would send lots of people to the psychiatric couch for many, many years. Was it difficult?
Not at all. Not at all. Maybe as a child you don't see the connection, but it created no problem at all.
No feeling of guilt.
No.
For example, that
and then go in and confiscate their property. And at age 14, George Soros did that. And you know, he's a Hungarian Jew, but you know, he became a Nazi at age 14, a bona fide Nazi that took the property of soon-to-be gassed Jews. So this is, you know, where he comes from. This is his origins, and he has always hated America, and he's always said as much. He hates America. And when he talks about his time as a Nazi, he did this on 60 Minutes. I'm sorry. He did this in an interview with 60 Minutes, and they asked him, "Hey, do you have any regrets? Do you have any guilt for what you did when you were a Nazi?" And he's like, "No, not at all." You know, I mean, he has no regrets, no remorse. But this is the same thing with when he destroys societies, when he attempts to use his financial and media leverage to reduce and divide a country to destroy their culture. But he does it not only because he has so much hate and so much disdain for humanity, and especially for Western culture and the United States, but he also does it to gain money. You know, when he reduces their culture and and the people are fighting and there's riots in the streets, then their currency takes a dive in value, and he buys it up. He holds on to it for 6 months, 2 years, 5 years, whatever. He holds all of his assets, you know, basically in digital format on these stock exchanges. And when after he disrupts it, he moves on, leaves it alone, lets them rebuild. After they get stronger again, he goes and sells the currency and makes billions of dollars. That's how he's gained all of his wealth. That's where George Soros's wealth has came from. And so I don't think this third wave feminism, is very common, man-hating, segregated third wave feminism is natural. But being that it's part of popular culture, and it's what we see on media quite a bit, and we see, women, taking the role of men and being all, buff and, assertive and alpha and, shaming men and taking over roles like, inserting themselves in roles that they wouldn't naturally adapt to prove that they can be just as good as men and just as successful as men and, do all the things men do. And so women are becoming men and men are becoming women, because you look at the promotion of homosexuality in Hollywood, right? These effeminate men, these gay, submissive men, and, they only really make up about 4% of society in the United States. And that's the entire LGBT culture, lesbians and homosexuals, as well as transvestites and the rest. 4% of the United States are these people, right? 2% of them are gay male. But if you watch sitcoms or if you watch Hollywood movies, you would think 30 to maybe 50% of society were homosexuals, or these what do they call them, non-binary, gender fluid people or whatever. You would think that there's a greater amount of society that's gay, and they want to make it look attractive, like the new fad, the way to be on the in crowd, and they're promoting it, they're propagandizing culture with this stuff. And so many sitcoms have a gay fella in there, but it's way more than what's represented in society. It's not 4% of sitcoms have a gay person in them, and it's not 4% of movies have a gay person in them. It's like 30 to 50% of Hollywood produced media showing a star in the show as being a homosexual, and it's becoming more and more common. And so I think that that society has really been disrupted, and I think it's in a negative way. My biggest problem with the homosexuality thing is not that the gay people are gay. That's fine with me, and I've had friends that are gay, and I've had a lot of respect for them. Some of them drive me nuts, and they make me ill. And like I was a homeless kid in Seattle when I was 17, 18, 19. And we lived in a abandoned house, what we called a squat. And there was like 4 gay guys there, a couple of lesbian gals, and then a bunch of punkers like me, and just whatever, just a bunch of street rats. And I had good relationships with 3 of the 4 gay guys. But one of them, this guy, Mama Chris, right, that's what he wanted to be called, that's what everybody called him, Mama Chris, was so gross and so blatantly gay. Like, everything he did, everything he was, it was conversations, gay this, gay that, crude and just, obnoxious conversations about gay sex and stuff. And it was all about his, his persona was gay. That was it. That was the only thing he had in his persona. He didn't, have any other qualities about him. That's nothing else. He didn't present anything else. It was only gay. And people that are heterosexual, that's what they produce. That's their persona. That's the only thing that they display is their sexuality. I did this with this gal, locker room talk constantly. They annoy me just as much. So, I don't have a problem with homosexuality in general. I have a problem with the cultural propaganda that we're getting from Hollywood, just because it's unnatural and it's disruptive and it's causing a lot of tension and it's dividing our country. That's my only real problem with the culture. But the problem with the specific gay lifestyle that I have is a health issue. Something I don't want my kids to deal with, I don't want my friends to deal with, people that I care about. I don't even want my worst enemy to deal with it. And it has to do with AIDS and HIV. And this 2% of the population, gay males, just 2% of the population are responsible for 58% of all new AIDS, HIV cases. HIV, AIDS, I'm guessing, getting that backwards, HIV then AIDS or whatever, but the HIV AIDS crisis is coming from this 2% of the population. Not intravenous drug users. They make up, less than 2 digits of percentage. It's like 8% or something are these IV drug users that are spreading AIDS. Heterosexuals have a very small amount of HIV contractions. Bisexuals are usually how straight people get AIDS. They date somebody who's bisexual, who got AIDS from their gay partner, and then gave it to them. Females dating a bisexual male, because it's usually male homosexuals that get AIDS. They usually spread it to their, straight female companions, and then their straight female companions give it to another straight male, back and forth like that. That's the pretty common route that heterosexuals get AIDS, at least according to studies. And I'll put a couple of those links in the article as well that I'll be displaying at veracitylife.com. So it's that I would like, as a father and as somebody who adores humanity and wants to see good for the world, my problem is AIDS and promiscuous behavior that causes these things in the gay community. And so as an ordained minister, I got it from Universal Life Church. I got my ordination from the Universal Life Church. I'm an ordained minister. I'm legally allowed to perform marriages and certify marriages. And I've told my gay friends, and I've announced it on my websites, that if you have a marriage that you're having, in a gay situation, I would officiate that as a minister. I would have no problem being the minister to say your vows and officiate the marriage with you. And in fact, I would encourage it. I think that marriage saves a lot of things in this world from destruction, be it the lives of children. I see that being a major problem, but also, this promiscuity and the STD issue with HIV and AIDS and others. Marriage saves a lot of people a lot of grief. And that's another thing with like this third wave feminism that I'm seeing, and that I'm, seeing a problem with, is you see single parent households, usually single mothers with kids, and not always, but often. The kids grow up lacking something, and they find it in strong alpha males, and usually they find problems. They find gang members, they find abusers and users that are alpha and take advantage of their undeveloped personas, or undeveloped emotional status. And they, these alpha males take advantage of them and ruin their lives, whether it be a young male looking up to a gang member, or whether it be a young female looking up to a man, a lover, to fill a gap of the father figure. This was what happened with my mother. My mother lost her father at age 11, married my father when she was still she got together with him when she was still a teenager. I think they got together when she was like 17 or 18. And they got married a couple years later, when I was like 8 months old in 1977. I think they got together when, I think it was like 1975, she was still a teenager. And then in 1977, I was a young boy, 8 months old, and they got married. But my dad was far older than my mother. And the same thing with my wife's mother. She lost her dad at age 3, committed suicide. My mom's dad had a heart attack and died at when she was age 11. He was young. He was like in his late 50s. I or early 50s. I think he might have been about 55, actually. He was pretty young. And my wife's mother's grandfather, I mean, my wife's grandfather, my wife's mother's father, killed himself, and she was age 3 at that point. And then my wife's father was 18 years older than my wife's mother. And they, you know, they're, I don't know what it is, you know, that they needed a father figure, and, you know, it was just that an older man took interest in him. They were probably fairly incompatible, and they fought a lot, both my mother and father and her mother and father, and they had, I don't know, you know, it was a struggle of a relationship, and, you know, on many levels. But I think that that's the gap that it leaves when you're raised by a single mother and not having a father in your life, is that you're looking for a stronger alpha male to guide you. You're looking for that, and you'll accept substandard relationships to fill that gap. And I think I went through that a little bit too. My dad spent a lot of time in and out of jail, being separated from my mother, being in another state on business. I mean, I rarely saw my dad when I was a kid. And, you know, I went for stronger alpha males, gang members, skaters that, you know, were kind of involved in drugs and other things. And it filled a gap for me. You know, it kind of gave me guidance and, you know, lessons on what it was to be a man, and, you know, to understand things that I had missed out on having a father. I saw this in my dad's marriage to his first wife and the kids that he produced in that marriage. And they, some of them, most of them, went for older men as well, to kind of play a role of father figure, I think, in a lot of ways. And it, you know, ended up in some disturbing situations and some broken relationships, you know, because the relationship didn't meet their expectations. It met, you know, it filled a gap, it filled a void, but it didn't really meet their emotional expectations. And so there have been some divorces, and there have been some, you know, issues and stuff. But I don't know. I see, I don't know. I see this as just being a cultural issue that I have a problem with, and I wanted to discuss it on this show. So if you're interested in having a conversation about this in the future, I will open this up to discussion when I figure out how to host people and bring people in. But looks like I've gone about 45 minutes on this one. I've said pretty much all I have to say. But I think as a culture we need to work on these things. We need to, you know, figure out what gender means in this world, and what relationships mean, and what